When Chen once again took control of the 9 Nether Guard, the immense battle intent surged like a vast ocean, instantly rising to overwhelming heights. The sheer concentration and resilience of the battle intent was so powerful that even those like the mountain-splitting king, who were far away, couldn't help but glance over, vaguely sensing something. But at that moment, they struggled to fully believe it. However, Chen paid no attention to them. Standing in midair, the 9 Nether battle roared like a dark sea beneath his feet. His eyes were half closed, and his mind merged with the immense battle intent, as if the endless roars of battle were echoing in his heart, making his blood gradually begin to boil. For Chen, regaining control of the 9 Nether battle was akin to releasing a tiger back into the mountains. He could easily sense that, surrounded by the sea of battle intent, every movement of his could unleash terrifying power capable of shattering the heavens and earth. If he had been able to use this power during his battle with Fang Yi, the latter's so-called ancient star physique would have been completely obliterated without a trace. Because this was the power of battle intent. Though it didn't come from his own strength and was bound by numerous restrictions, even the most powerful warriors had to admit that it was an extremely intimidating force. In ancient times, the names of top-tier battle formation masters could rival those of the pinnacle experts in the world. While their strength would dramatically decline without their vast armies, when a top-tier battle formation master commanded a similarly elite force, even a heavenly supreme-level peak expert wouldn't dare to underestimate them in the slightest. We were both injured in our previous clash. How about we test each other once more? Chen's sharp black eyes fixed on the distance, where the celestial crocodile army had already formed a defensive formation and was quickly retreating. Fang Yi was among them, and even from this distance, Chen could still feel the icy, bone-chilling gaze of the latter. Chirp! Chen's palm fell decisively, his mind commanding the 9 Nether battle will, which surged outward like a dark, roaring sea. A clear and resonant cry rang through the heavens and earth as the overwhelming battle intent manifested into an enormous 9 Nether sparrow. The vast body of the sparrow was engraved with complex battle runes, and the sheer force of the battle intent caused ripples to spread through the space. Battle Spirit. When the battle spirit appeared, the mountain-splitting king and others finally noticed. Their pupils contracted, and they looked in shock at Chen's direction. Good Mu King. At such a young age, he's able to control battle intent to this degree, the mountain-splitting king murmured. His army was filled with powerful warriors and numerous excellent leaders, but none had ever been able to reach Chen's level of condensing the battle spirit. Not far behind the mountain-splitting king, Zhou Yu, one of the former 4 leaders of the great Luo heaven domain, wore a complicated expression. He stared at the battle spirit in the sky above the 9 Nether Guard. After a moment, he could only sigh in admiration. Chen's move left him so shaken that he had completely lost the desire to continue his provocations or chase after him. Whoosh! The moment the battle spirit appeared, under the watchful eyes of countless observers, it swiftly flapped its wings and slashed downward. The gleam of light was as sharp as a blade, and with a single sweep, it tore the sky apart, appearing above the celestial crocodile army, cutting downward without mercy. The light streaked across the sky, as if splitting the space in two. Xu Ba stood within the celestial crocodile army, watching the gleaming light descending upon him. A chill ran down his spine, and he immediately let out a roar from his throat. Celestial crocodile battle intent. Boom. Immediately, blood-red battle intent surged up from the celestial crocodile army, transforming into strands of battle intent that spanned the heavens, attempting to block the incoming light. Uft, uft. However, their efforts were in vain. Wherever the light passed, the battle intent strands shattered apart, unable to stop the relentless force. The devastating momentum was so fierce that even the commanders in the celestial crocodile army felt their hearts freeze. The sharp light, capable of tearing space apart, finally descended, causing a series of piercing sounds as if blades were piercing through flesh. Figures from the celestial crocodile army fell from the sky, blood spraying from their bodies, clearly affected by the fierce attack. Xu Ba's face twitched rapidly at this moment, looking particularly grotesque. Beside him, Fang Yi's face was also slightly pale, not expecting that after Mu Chun took control of the 9 nether guards, their strength would reach such a terrifying level. Retreat immediately, Xu Ba growled, as he had already sensed that the Blood Eagle guards, originally trapped in the valley, were now preparing to break out and join the 9 nether guards to surround their celestial crocodile army. Once surrounded, they would undoubtedly pay an even greater price. And now, with the Flame Wolf Lord and Celestial Bear Lord retreating under the pursuit of the Mountain-Splitting King's 3 armies, it was impossible for them to spare any troops to assist. They could only rely on themselves to retreat. Mu Chun coldly watched the large-scale retreat of the Celestial Crocodile army, clearly not intending to miss the chance to strike a fallen enemy. With a wave of his hand, the 9 nether guards surged out like a vast black cloud. In the sky above, the battle wolf spirit flapped its enormous wings, and the overwhelming battle intent surged, turning into countless black feathers that shot out like arrows, covering the sky in a violent barrage. Above the sky, a massive army quickly retreated, while another army relentlessly pursued them. Each time the two forces collided with their fierce battle intents, terrifying spatial shocks erupted, and the earth below was directly torn apart. Under such a fierce clash of battle intents, both sides suffered casualties, but it was clear that the Celestial Crocodile army, who had no desire to fight, suffered even heavier losses. Despite their numerical advantage, the 9 nether guards, aided by the battle wolf spirit, were able to compensate for the gap in numbers. Mu Chun appeared atop the head of the battle wolf spirit, his eyes narrowing as he watched the rapidly retreating Celestial Crocodile army. Or more specifically, he was watching the figure of Fang Yi in that army. His fingers suddenly pointed into the air. Buzz! The countless black feathers that had been raining down abruptly shifted direction. A dozen or so black feathers, as fast as thunder, dodged the Celestial Crocodile army's battle intent interception and locked onto Fang Yi's figure before shooting directly toward him. Clearly, Mu Chun intended to seize this opportunity to eliminate Fang Yi, his formidable foe. Fang Yi, seeing the black feathers coming straight at him, changed his expression. He could feel the immense power covering the battle intent on those black feathers. This was the gathered battle intent of the entire 9 nether guards. The Mu Chun of now was no longer the same as before. Boom. Although he knew the situation, Fang Yi was not one to sit idly by. With a low growl, the spiritual energy that had previously recovered exploded without reserve. A massive shadow once again formed around him, and it was none other than the ancient star physique. Mu Chun looked at the star physique with a cold smile on his lips. He lightly swiped his finger, and the dozen or so black feathers pierced through the void, relentlessly striking the star physique. Boom! The violent spiritual energy fluctuations swept out. The star physique, which had previously been a mutual destruction with Mu Chun, was now shattered. Fang Yi's figure was sent flying, spitting blood uncontrollably, his face as pale as paper. With just one touch, Fang Yi had been utterly defeated. At a distance, the various forces still watching the chaotic battlefield were all dumbfounded. Who would have thought that Mu Chun, who had barely fought to a stalemate with Fang Yi earlier, could now be so terrifying? With a single strike, he defeated Fang Yi. Although this was because Mu Chun was now wielding the combined power of the 9 nether guards, no one would foolishly consider this mere external force. This was a battlefield, and only the results mattered. No one cared how you achieved them. Absolute fairness. Only a fool would believe otherwise. Mu Chun looked indifferently at the defeated Fang Yi. The latter no longer had the sharpness he had shown when they had faced off alone. Now, the two were no longer on the same level. Whoosh! Mu Chun's sleeve swished, and once again, a dozen or so black feathers silently shot out from the vast black feathers enveloping the Celestial Crocodile army, heading straight for the fleeing Fang Yi. Clearly, he intended to finish off the fallen enemy without mercy. Fang Yi, feeling Mu Chun's murderous intent immediately, turned pale and hurriedly retreated. However, at this moment, Mu Chun clearly did not give him any chance. The black feathers, sharp as a blade, were covered with overwhelming 9 nether battle will, piercing through the void like lightning. Within a few breaths, they reached above Fang Yi, and then came crashing down with a thunderous roar. Fang Yi's escape route was blocked, with no way to flee. Boom! However, Just as the black feathers were about to strike Fang Yi's body, Xu Ba's figure appeared in front of him like a flash of lightning. With a loud shout, a torrent of spiritual power erupted like a storm. Bang! The black feathers, upon contact with the storm-like spiritual power, instantly shattered into pieces. Trying to kill someone in front of me? You little brat, you are too arrogant. Xu Ba glared at Chen, then coldly shouted at the leaders of the celestial crocodile army. You all retreat for now. I'll deal with this arrogant brat. Is being a 6th grade supreme really so impressive? Since you want to stick your neck out, I'll use you to sacrifice my 9 nether guard battle flag. However, facing Xu Ba's angry roar, Chen simply smiled indifferently. He suddenly formed a hand seal, and the battle spirit let out a long cry, instantly sweeping the heavens and earth with terrifying battle intent. The black feathers in the sky instantly changed direction, locking onto Xu Ba's position, and surged towards him like a tidal wave, with a murderous intent emanating from within. All the surrounding forces gasped in shock. Chen was incredibly arrogant, intending to surround and annihilate a 6th grade supreme with the power of his army. Buzz! The air shook, and countless black feathers, like sharp arrows, tore through the void and swept outward. At the end of the storm of black feathers stood a figure, stepping on the void, resembling a fierce crocodile, exuding boundless murderous energy. This figure, of course, was Xu Ba, the lord of the celestial crocodile. His eyes were filled with viciousness as he looked at the overwhelming assault coming toward him. His face showed no sign of fear. Although Chen had refined the 9 nether guard battle will into a battle spirit, such power was not infinite. With Chen's 4th grade supreme strength, even with the help of battle will, he could only barely reach the strength of a 6th grade supreme. Such power, Xu Ba thought, wouldn't be enough to defeat him. Celestial crocodile divine art, heaven swallowing mouth. Xu Ba's eyes gleamed with viciousness. He stomped his foot, and a torrent of spiritual power surged, transforming into an enormous, terrifying crocodile mouth in front of him. The giant mouth was pitch black, as if capable of swallowing heaven and earth. As it opened, a powerful suction force erupted, pulling in all the black feathers that had been violently shot toward him. Boom, boom. Inside the massive crocodile mouth, a series of explosive sounds rang out as the terrifying, violent spiritual power clashed, distorting the mouth, which then exploded with a loud bang. The violent spiritual shockwave blasted outward. Xu Ba's body shook, but he dispersed the shockwave and locked his gloomy gaze onto Chen. He sneered, "Kid, don't think you can run wild just because of the 9 nether battle will. That battle will is ultimately an external force. It can't make you invincible in this world. Of course, I can't be invincible in the world, but it's enough to deal with you," Chen said with a cold smile. Under normal circumstances, with his current strength, facing a 6th grade supreme like Xu Ba, his chances of winning would be slim. But with the power of the 9 nether guard battle will, he was not afraid of Xu Ba. Arrogant fool. Xu Ba laughed in rage. His figure then turned into a streak of light, shooting forward. He clenched his palm, and a blood-red curved blade appeared in his hand. The blade was engraved with scarlet patterns, and a murderous aura emanated from it, clearly a very powerful weapon. Swish! Xu Ba slashed the air with his blade, and instantly, the space in front of him was torn apart. A massive blood-red blade beam, hundreds of meters long, swept toward the 9 nether guard, slicing through the air. With this strike, Xu Ba demonstrated the power of a 6th grade supreme. The might of the blade was so immense that even someone like Fang Yi, a peak 5th grade supreme, would find it hard to resist. Chen's eyes narrowed as he looked at Xu Ba's powerful attack. He remained calm and unfazed, changing his hand seal. The overwhelming battle intent howled as it transformed into a battle intent whip, colliding fiercely with the blade beam. Boom! A shocking burst of spiritual energy swept through the area as the battle intent whip and the blade beam shattered under the impact. The clash between the two was evenly matched. Xu Ba's expression darkened, and his assault didn't stop. His figure shot out like a shadow, and countless sharp blade beams filled the sky. Facing Xu Ba's assault, Chen showed no fear. He wielded the overwhelming 9 nether battle will to meet the attack head-on. The terrifying forces of both sides collided, shaking the space around them, the impact reverberating with a frightening force. However, in this clash, neither side gained a significant upper hand, and neither could truly overcome the other. The battle subtly began to show signs of a stalemate. From a distance, the various forces watching the battlefield couldn't help but gasp in admiration. Chen truly lived up to his reputation as a dark horse. Earlier, he had forced Fang Yi into a mutually destructive battle with his own strength, and now, aided by the 9 Nether Guard, he was locking horns with Xu Ba, an old powerhouse, in a battle that seemed evenly matched. This performance left everyone in awe. After the Grand Hunting War ends, if the Great Luo Heaven Domain isn't destroyed, Chen could very well surpass Fang Yi and become the new overlord of the younger generation in the Northern Domain. While Chen was locked in a fierce battle with Xu Ba, the 9 Nether forces surged forward to attack the retreating Celestial Crocodile army. At the same time, the Blood Eagle King led the Blood Eagle Guard into the fray, launching a frenzied assault on the Celestial Crocodile army. Though the Celestial Crocodile army had many commanders leading their troops in resistance, they were no match for the combined attack of 2 6th-grade Supremes and the Blood Eagle Guard. After all, the Celestial Crocodile army had no figures like Chen, who could manifest the battle-will spirit. In the onslaught of spiritual energy, figures from the Celestial Crocodile army were struck down from the sky, clearly killed by the shockwaves of spiritual power. In just a short time, the Celestial Crocodile army suffered heavy casualties. Their frantic retreat, once full of arrogance, now looked utterly defeated. In another direction, the 2 God Hall armies sent for reinforcements were also struggling to fend off the attacks from the Mountain-Splitting King's 3 legions. Though they still had Flame Wolf Lord and Celestial Bear Lord on their side, they could only retreat while fighting. The various forces witnessing the chaotic battlefield couldn't help but comment on the situation, seeing the God Hall armies being forced back. It seemed that the God Hall was finished for today. Xu Ba, engaged in a fierce struggle with Chen, was eventually forced to retreat. He finally realized that Chen wasn't aiming for a life-or-death battle. Instead, Chen had only been stalling him to buy time for the 9 Nether and Blood Eagle Halls to massacre the Celestial Crocodile army. Without Xu Ba's leadership, the Celestial Crocodile army was no match for the 9 Nether and Blood Eagle King. Boy, remember this. I'll make you suffer 1,000 cuts one day. Xu Ba roared in fury, quickly breaking free from Chen's grip and retreating with a few flashes, leading the Celestial Crocodile army in a full retreat. As they retreated, the 9 Nether and Blood Eagle King seized the opportunity to strike, causing further casualties in the Celestial Crocodile army. Didn't expect the mighty Celestial Crocodile Lord to be such a coward. Chen's voice rang out mockingly in the sky. However, he didn't slow down his attacks. He immediately urged the 9 Nether Guard to pursue the Celestial Crocodile army. Xu Ba, enraged by Chen's taunt, was seething with bloodshot eyes, wanting nothing more than to tear Chen to pieces. However, not being a fool, he quickly understood that Chen was trying to provoke him and managed to suppress his anger and humiliation. With a roar, he led the Celestial Crocodile army in a full retreat. The chase continued for about half an hour, spanning over 1,000 miles. In the midst of this pursuit, the Celestial Crocodile army suffered heavy losses. Xu Ba was driven nearly insane by the damage to his forces. The tremendous commotion from this chase attracted the attention of countless forces along the way. When they saw that the Celestial Crocodile army was being pursued, and that it was the God Hall's forces, they were left dumbfounded. The God Hall was one of the top forces in the Northern Domain, known for its vast resources and powerful experts. Who would have thought that this once mighty force would be reduced to such a pitiful state? After the initial shock, the uproar was immense. My God! That's the Celestial Crocodile King of the God Hall. How did he end up in such a sorry state? That pursuer, it looks like it's Chen from the Great Luo Heaven Domain. I've seen him in Dragon Phoenix Heaven. The Dark Horse, Chen? How is this possible? He couldn't even defeat the Netherworld Prince in Dragon Phoenix Heaven. It's him for sure. And isn't that Xu Ba beside him? TSK. With such a lineup, how could they be losing so badly? Hearing the countless shocked exclamations along the way, Xu Ba and Fang Yi both had grim expressions. their faces ashen. However, they didn't dare to hesitate for even a moment. They could only rage inwardly. The chase lasted for 1,000 miles. Eventually, Chen chose to retreat. He knew that continuing the pursuit would no longer serve any significant purpose. They could never truly wipe out the celestial crocodile army. Moreover, if they cornered Xu Ba into a desperate situation, leading to a final showdown between the celestial crocodile army and them, the Nine Nether Guard would inevitably pay a heavy price as well. And there was always the possibility of attracting reinforcements from other divine halls, which would bring them even more trouble. So, at this point, it was best to call it a day. After 1,000 miles, Chen decisively ordered the retreat. Although the Blood Eagle King wanted to annihilate the enemy entirely, he no longer dared to treat Chen with the same attitude as before. Plus, he had been saved by Chen. Therefore, he did not oppose Chen's decision. The Nine Nether Guard and the Blood Eagle Guard gathered together and began their retreat, turning into a sea of flowing light, disappearing into the horizon. Xu Ba and Fang Yi, who had been fleeing in panic, breathed a sigh of relief when they realized that Chen's forces were retreating. They cautiously led the celestial crocodile army to settle on a mountain peak. At this moment, the celestial crocodile army had almost lost all morale. The various commanders were in a sorry state, tallying the losses. In the end, their faces were all pale. In this pursuit, the celestial crocodile army had lost nearly 1/3 of their elite warriors. Xu Ba listened to the reports from his commanders, his face contorted with fury. His eyes reddened as he gazed at the direction in which Chen's forces had left, unable to restrain his roar. Chen, I will never let you off. The celestial crocodile army had been built by him over many years, and the loss of 1/3 of their forces would cost him countless time and resources. Yet this time, it had all fallen to Chen. Fang Yi dryly said, Sushan Lord, as long as we join up with the other armies from the Divine Hall, eradicating Chen will be a piece of cake. Xu Ba shot a vicious glare at Fang Yi, his anger nearly boiling over, but he managed to suppress it. He coldly said, this kid does have some tricks. At such a young age, he can already forge the battle-will spirit. At this point, Xu Ba's eyes suddenly narrowed, as if a thought had crossed his mind. A sinister smile curled at the corner of his lips. The battle-will spirit, huh? It's worth notifying that person. She's very interested in those who can forge the battle-will spirit. Xu Ba grinned wickedly. Chen, don't think that the Divine Hall has no geniuses with battle-will. The battle-will spirit is not yours alone. A lone peak stood on the plains. When Chen, the Nine Nether, and the Blood Eagle King arrived with their 2 armies, they saw that the Mountain-Splitting King, Spirit Sword King, and Cliff King had already been waiting there. We're in your debt, 3 of you. Chen and the others clasped their fists in gratitude. If it weren't for the 3 kings' timely arrival, they would have been the ones running for their lives. The Mountain-Splitting King waved his hand with a smile and said cheerfully, as fellow members of the Great Luo Heaven Domain, it's only natural to help each other out. King and Nine Nether King letting go of past grudges to come to Blood Eagle Hall's aid first. Now that's true magnanimity. At this point, the Mountain-Splitting King glanced at the Blood Eagle King, who looked somewhat embarrassed. The latter had been too flashy in the Great Luo Heaven Domain, so the Mountain-Splitting King had never had a particularly favorable view of him. Hence, his words now were tinged with a hint of sharpness. However, the Blood Eagle King, having been saved by Chen's group, seemed somewhat grateful. So, despite the subtle sting in the words, he did not get angry. He merely turned to Chen and Nine Nether, clasped his fists, and said, I will repay this favor when the opportunity arises. Perhaps it was a moment of sincerity, as the previously gloomy expression on the Blood Eagle King's face now seemed more genuine. His display of sincerity softened the Mountain-Splitting King's expression as well. Chen and Nine Nether exchanged glances and smiled. While they still held some resentment toward the Blood Eagle King for his past actions, they could distinguish between the important and the trivial. So, when they received the plea for help from Blood Eagle Hall, they had rushed over as quickly as possible. Now, it seemed that their assistance had won the Blood Eagle King over to some extent. It was an unexpected but welcome turn of events. Looks like after this, King's reputation will spread in this hunting war. The battle spirit is not something an ordinary person can cultivate, the Spirit Sword King said with a smile, his eyes filled with surprise. The Mountain-Splitting King also nodded with a smile. Among the top forces in the Northern Domain, there aren't many who can cultivate the battle spirit. Other top forces also have people who have cultivated the battle spirit. Mu Chen's eyes flickered as he caught the implication in Mountain-Splitting King's words. From what he said, it seemed there were others among the top forces who had reached this stage. The Northern Domain is full of geniuses, and inevitably, some will have special talents in this regard. These people are the objects of full recruitment by the top forces. Mountain-Splitting King nodded. From the intel we've gathered, there are probably at least 5 individuals among the top forces in the Northern Domain who have successfully cultivated the battle spirit. However, unlike people like Fang Yi, these battle spirit geniuses are of immense importance, so most top forces choose to hide their information. Thus, ordinary people would have a hard time knowing about their existence, and the top forces won't expose them easily because it could lead to assassination attempts. Mu Chen nodded deeply in agreement. When Fang Yi found out that he had cultivated the battle spirit, he went to great lengths to try and eliminate him. That was because Fang Yi knew the kind of threat someone who could cultivate the battle spirit posed. Of course, from a certain perspective, it was because those who could cultivate the battle spirit were qualified to become battle formation masters. Although the success rate was extremely low, what if it succeeded? For a top force with many elite armies, that would undoubtedly be a huge asset. Thus, Mu Chen understood the top forces' decision to keep their battle spirit geniuses hidden. Which top forces are these 5 from? Mu Chen pondered for a moment before asking. This kind of important intelligence was something he had to know clearly, because he might eventually face these battle spirit geniuses hidden by the top forces in the future. Divine Hall, Netherworld Palace, Shintian Palace, Demon Gate, 10,000 Saints Mountain. Mountain-Splitting King shrugged, helplessly. Our great Luo Heaven Domain also tried to recruit such battle spirit geniuses, but the Domain Lord has been in a deep slumber for years and isn't really concerned about this. So for all these years, our great Luo Heaven Domain has never had such battle spirit geniuses. At this point, Mountain-Splitting King looked at Mu Chen with some appreciation. But luckily, now that you've appeared, our great Luo Heaven Domain finally has a battle spirit genius. Mu Chen gave a helpless smile. He knew this wasn't because Mandala wasn't concerned, but because she had to sleep and suppress the curse within her, leaving her no extra attention for matters within the great Luo Heaven Domain. Do you have any information on the battle spirit geniuses from Divine Hall and Shintian Palace? Mu Chen thought for a moment and asked. He had significant grudges with these 2 forces, so he needed to be extra cautious about their intelligence. Mountain-Splitting King stroked his chin. The battle spirit genius from Divine Hall seems to be a girl. As for the one from Shintian Palace, he seems to be a madman. Mu Chen was taken aback. He looked at Mountain-Splitting King. That's it. Mountain-Splitting King spread his hands. That's all. Generally speaking, such information is kept well hidden by the forces, and before it's used, not much is known. Mu Chen couldn't help but roll his eyes. That was practically useless information, but since that was all he could get, he'd have to accept it. As long as he knew of their existence, he could remain on guard. Since the crisis here is resolved, we should leave. Time is precious, and we need to explore other ruins to collect fallen source pills. Mountain-Splitting King clapped his hands, preparing to lead his troops away. Mu Chen pondered for a moment before suddenly looking at the 4 kings present and smiling. I have a suggestion. We could gather together and explore the ruins collectively. This way, we can avoid many problems like today. It was rare to have all 4 kings gathered here, and they were free helpers. If they could work together, it would undoubtedly greatly increase their efficiency. Upon hearing Mu Chen's words, the 4 kings were momentarily stunned before frowning. Gathering together, though our force would be stronger, would slow down our exploration of the ruins. They had considered gathering together to sweep through, but the ruins of the fallen battlefield were too difficult to find. They had to disperse in order to maximize their chances of finding the ruins. If they stayed together, the results might not be as good as spreading out. Mu Chen smiled and directly asked, "How many fallen source pills have you gathered so far?" "We've found 2 grade 3 ruins and have 300 fallen source pills," The Blood Eagle King responded first, not understanding Mu Chen's meaning. We only have a little over 200. The Spirit Sword King said helplessly. Same here, a little over 200, said the Cliff King with a smile. The Mountain Splitting King glanced at the three of them, grinning with pride, and said, looks like we got luckier. We have 500 Fallen Source pills. The other three kings were immediately stunned, looking at the Mountain Splitting King with envy. After all, it was not easy to find the hidden ruins in the fallen battlefield, and they also had to be on guard against other forces interfering. Mu Chen looked at the proud Mountain Splitting King and couldn't help but smile. We have a total of 1,200 Fallen Source pills. The Mountain Splitting King's laughter abruptly stopped, and the other three kings stared at Mu Chen in disbelief. 1,200 Fallen Source pills was an enormous amount for them. To gather that many, they would have to explore at least 7 or 8 Grade 3 ruins. Could it be that Mu Chen's group just casually stumbled upon one after another? Mu Chen waved his hand with a smile, and immediately, the Fallen Source pills surged into the air, swirling around him. He looked at the four kings, their eyes wide in shock, and said, about half of the Fallen Source pills came from winning them from Xu Ba earlier. The rest, we've refined ourselves. You found how many ruins? The Mountain Splitting King asked in disbelief. They only got 500 Fallen Source pills because 2 forces had foolishly tried to rob them, but they had been repelled by the Mountain Splitting Legion. Otherwise, they would probably only have about 300 by now. Counting some lower-grade ruins, we should have found 6 or 7 in total, Mu Chen said casually after a rough estimate. The four kings exchanged strange glances, and their gazes turned odd. If they didn't know Mu Chen well, they would have thought he was making things up. Mu Chen, seeing their looks, wasn't surprised. He shrugged and said nonchalantly, we found a mysterious treasure in this fallen battlefield that helps us locate some of the ruins, so? Bastard. As soon as Mu Chen finished speaking, the four kings' eyes reddened. The Mountain Splitting King couldn't help but curse. They stared at Mu Chen with burning eyes because they understood exactly what his words meant. A treasure that could locate ruins in the fallen battlefield was a true divine artifact to all the major forces. With such a treasure, gathering Fallen Source pills would be as easy as pie for them. The four kings stared at Mu Chen with fiery eyes. If Mu Chen wasn't from their great Luo Heaven domain, they might have even considered taking it by force. Mu Chen, seeing their intense looks, smiled and said, now, I invite the 4 of you to join us. If we're lucky, we might even find a Grade 1 ruin. The Mountain Splitting King and the other kings licked their lips and nodded vigorously. Let's do it. Instead of aimlessly wandering through the fallen battlefield, it was far better to follow Mu Chen, who had a detector and a clear purpose. Even a fool could tell which option was more efficient. Mu Chen, seeing the determined kings, exchanged a smile with the 9 Nether. With these 4 powerful allies and their armies following, it was time for them to sweep through. Fallen battlefield. In this ancient battlefield full of danger, time seemed to slow down, perhaps because the sky was constantly veiled by violent spiritual energy. The cycle of day and night in the battlefield was hard to perceive. But no matter the environment, the brutality of the Grand Hunting War still quietly spread with the passage of time. In just a few short days, more and more forces entered the ancient battlefield. They scurried around like rats, searching for ruins. And whenever a ruin was discovered, it would soon attract all kinds of people, like sharks sensing blood. In the battle for the relics, bloodshed was inevitable. In the brutal bloodbaths, countless powerful warriors fell, and the entire world seemed shrouded in a wave of carnage and slaughter. However, the game had already been set, and those who entered were mere pawns. As for who would ultimately break through the game, it was clear that they would have to endure a series of life-and-death battles. The great battle between Mu Chen and the Divine Hall quickly spread in the past few days. After all, Mu Chen had chased the celestial crocodile army for thousands of miles, and such a commotion was impossible to conceal. Both the Great Luo Heaven Domain and the Divine Hall were top forces in the Northern Domain, and their every move drew attention. Therefore, it was no surprise when the news spread and caused a stir. Especially when Mu Chen, relying on his strength, fought Fang Yi to a mutual injury, then took control of the 9 Nether Guard and used battle will power to crush Fang Yi and stall the celestial crocodile Lord Xu Ba. The shock turned to astonishment and disbelief. Mu Chen's name, after Dragon Phoenix Heaven, spread across the northern domain. However, there were still some who questioned his third-place ranking in the Dragon Phoenix record. Many believed his greatest advantage in Dragon Phoenix Heaven came from the support of the Flame Emperor's daughter, and as such, his achievements were subject to skepticism. Yet, these doubts were shattered with a single punch. A few months ago, even at his full strength, Mu Chen could only barely hold his ground against the Netherworld Prince, clearly being at a disadvantage. But in just 3 to 4 months, he had already reached a level where he could fight the dominant figure in the Dragon Phoenix record, Fang Yi, to a mutual defeat. The speed of his improvement was jaw-dropping. What shocked countless strong warriors even more was the news that Mu Chen had mastered battle will and even condensed the battle will spirit. If he could focus this power on himself, even Fang Yi would be crushed, and he could directly challenge a veteran powerhouse like Xu Ba. This level of power was enough to make all factions treat him with caution, no longer seeing him as a mere inexperienced young man. As the Grand Hunting War unfolded with brutal struggles, Mu Chen's reputation continued to spread. This time, no one dared to question him. Boom! A violent surge of spiritual energy erupted from the heavens and earth, forming a streak of light that pierced through the sky and obliterated a retreating warrior, bathing the heavens in blood. The Netherworld Prince, expressionless, retracted his fist and descended from the air. Behind him, figures flashed by, whispering in his ear. Mu Chen, huh? The Netherworld Prince squinted his eyes, a flicker of surprise crossing his gaze. He hadn't expected the man who was once pushed to the brink of death by him to improve so dramatically in just a few months, to the point where he could fight Fang Yi to a mutual defeat. The Netherworld Prince slowly withdrew his hands, turned, and coldly spoke, his voice carrying through the air. I originally planned to personally defeat Fang Yi, but since you can fight him to such an extent, I'll deal with you first if we meet. This time, no one will save you. In an ancient relic, a vast battle will fill the air. A massive army stood suspended in the sky, and above them, a figure stood with hands behind his back, his feet grounded in a sea of battle will. This figure grinned and looked ahead, where another army stood. However, their battle will was utterly suppressed by his own. Die, he snarled, his voice dripping with bloodlust. He clenched his fist, and the sea of battle will surged, forming a giant blood-red serpent. This was, indeed, a battle will spirit. Boom. The massive tail of the battle will serpent pierced through the heavens and earth, like a giant axe, tearing through the enemy army. Countless screams filled the air as warriors plunged from the sky, falling in a rain of blood. The figure laughed at the sight, then turned his head to a figure behind him and asked, Young Hall Master, the person you mentioned, is it Mu Chen? Behind the figure of the man, a gloomy face appeared. It was none other than Lu Yin from the Xiantian Palace. At this moment, his face was filled with deep hatred. In Dragon Phoenix Heaven, Mu Chen had destroyed his physical body. Had it not been for his father spending an enormous amount of effort to remold his body, he would have been completely crippled by now. I didn't expect this kid not only to control battle will, but also to refine the battle spirit, Lu Yin said coldly. The figure smiled slightly, extending his tongue to lick his crimson lips. The bloodshot veins in his eyes became even more intense as he spoke in a low voice. Young Hall Master, we can strike a deal. I'll make that Mu Chen crawl before you like a dog, as long as you help me take the position of Chief Grand Commander of Xiantian Palace. Lu Yan's eyes narrowed. A fierce and sinister expression crawled into his gaze, and after a moment, he nodded fiercely. Good. The scene unfolded in a vast plain. However, this plain was in ruins, littered with countless corpses and flowing blood. On a small hill in the middle of the plain, a young girl sat in a wheelchair, her black hair cascading down. She quietly gazed at the desolate land before her. Behind her, an army stretched out in a black wave. The breaths of thousands of soldiers merged as one, and the overwhelming battle will permeated the air. All eyes were filled with reverence as they looked at the girl's frail figure. A figure suddenly landed behind the girl, causing her to slightly open her beautiful eyes. Commander Mu, we have news. It's from Xiaofeng. The figure behind her spoke softly. He wants you to deal with Mu Chen from the Great Luo Heaven Domain. It seems that Mu Chun has also refined the battle spirit. Xiao Fang said that if you deal with Mu Chun, he will bring the 9 heavens soul rebirth grass for your sister. At the mention of the 9 heavens soul rebirth grass, the girl's eyes, which resembled a dark abyss, flickered slightly. She then lifted her fair and beautiful face, nodding gently. I understand. In this vast and endless fallen battlefield, a cruel atmosphere always hung in the air. As time passed, brutal battles erupted one after another, with the law of the jungle being vividly demonstrated here. Amidst the commotion caused by Mu Chen's defeat of several Divine Hall armies, Mu Chen, the central figure, paid no attention to these disturbances. After painstakingly winning over King of Alligator Mountain and the 4 powerful armies he led, he began to make full use of the soul-searching plate in his possession. At this moment, every second counted in the frantic race to seize the fallen source pills. Whoever secured enough of them would gain the upper hand in obtaining the Earth's supreme secret treasure. Since Mu Chun possessed such a divine artifact as the soul-searching plate, it would be foolish to waste it. With the help of this soul-searching plate, Mu Chun and his massive forces made astonishing progress in just 4 days. They had uncovered more than 30 ruins, with about a dozen not reaching the level of a 3rd-grade ruin. They had also found 10 or so 3rd-grade ruins, and even discovered a 2nd-grade ruin. Among these 30-plus ruins, they had gathered nearly 10,000 fallen source pills. If divided proportionally, each faction had received over 2,000 fallen source pills. This immense gain made even King of Alligator Mountain unable to hide his joy, as it would have been impossible for them to obtain this many in such a short period of time without the help of Mu Chen's resources. Mu Chen was also quite satisfied. Whenever they discovered ruins, other factions occasionally took notice, but when they saw Mu Chen's terrifying lineup, most of them would retreat without hesitation. After all, with 5 6th-grade Supremes and 5 elite armies, even if a 7th-grade Supreme showed up, they would probably just avoid the area. Moreover, some ruins were perilous, like the lone 2nd-grade ruin they discovered. Inside it, there were no less than 10 ancient fallen beings whose bodies had not fully decayed due to special reasons. The secondary-grade ruins had brought significant trouble to Mu Chun and the others, even causing some casualties. This was still manageable because Mu Chun had brought along the mountain-splitting king and his forces. If they had ventured into the 9 Nether Hall alone, the losses would have been catastrophic. Therefore, he was relieved that he had enlisted the mountain-splitting king and his team as reinforcements at the time. Outside an ancient ruin, several armies stood in perfect formation, a sea of black overwhelming the view. This was after Mu Chun and his group had completed an exploration and were preparing to rest. Mu Chun sat cross-legged atop a lone peak, his eyes closed in quiet meditation. After a while, he suddenly opened his eyes and glanced below. There, 5 armies, including the 9 Nether's Guard, were seated in stillness. Above them, vast waves of battle will surged. These 5 overwhelming forces of battle intent were incompatible with each other, each occupying its own space in the sky. Mu Chen stared at the 5 colossal waves of battle intent. His black eyes slightly rippled as an unusual thought surged from deep within his heart.